Noah, thank you very much indeed. Simon and the gang of gratification. Okay. We'll take you back a few years to when I was in year 11, and my school was lucky enough to be located near a major river with a boathouse, meaning we were given the chance to try out rowing 2 afternoons a week. However, because I wasn't exactly the fittest teenager, I found rowing quite draining, to be honest, therefore decided to volunteer to become a cox. My job would be to steer the boat, obviously, that's what coxes do, and instruct the rowers using a speaker system. And I was put in charge of B crew. I'm still not sure how the teachers trusted a beginner to steer a 20,000 pound vessel, but in my first few weeks, apart from 1 or 2 near collisions, I managed to guide it through the water without a hitch, and my crew and I had become a close team. We were by no means the best, but we didn't care. The biggest event of all in our calendar, without a doubt, was the annual National Schools Regatta at the end of the school year, which took place at Eton Dorney Lake, the host of the rowing for the 2012 Olympics, you'll remember. All the famous schools were there. Eton, who actually practiced there, Harrow, St Paul's, you name it. So come the day of the regatta, we arrived at the lake and began putting together our boat. It was so long it had to be split in half in order for it to fit on the trailer, though I think a total of 12 bolts were responsible for holding it together. So, no need to worry about it falling apart in mid-race, right?
No.
As the rest of my team were responsible, as a bit of a spoiler, I realise. As the rest of my team were responsible for attaching their riggers to the boat that their blades rested on, I was in charge of bolting the 2 boat halves together. With my wrench, I fastened one, then another on the other side of the boat, but was then distracted by a friend who was asking for help. I obliged, and as my hands were full of nuts, bolts and washers, I put them in a pile on a nearby table momentarily in order to be available, and I'd continue to attach the boat together in a minute, or so I thought. After helping my friend, I walked back to the table to find that the pile of nuts and bolts had disappeared. I panicked and started to look around, but all the containers that were supposed to have spares were empty. I asked around, but surprise, surprise, nobody had a clue about what was going on. This was very bad. As if things couldn't get any worse, I heard our coach, Mr. G, approaching, telling us to get ready. We only had a couple of minutes until we were up. He came up to me and asked if the boat was ready. If I told him the truth, now the entire race would probably be off. Yes, I replied. Everything's okay. He was pleased and went off to get his bicycle. Somehow I hoped that we would get through the races with only 2 of the 12 required bolts holding our boat together. Should be fine, I thought to myself. They look pretty strong bolts. Sure they'll hold up. Holding the boat on our shoulders, we walked to the pontoons where we'd cast off. We lowered it into the water, and there were no leaks visible. Phew! That took a small amount of weight off my shoulders. We lined up in front of a floating pontoon and waited for the signal to go. 3, 2, 1, and we were off, thundering through the water at a noticeably good rate. While shouting, I looked to my side to see we were actually edging away from a number of our rivals. Who knows, maybe the saved weight of 10 missing bolts was helping. Maybe it was a stroke of genius. Whatever the reason, we kept going, all surprised at our newfound success. This is when it went downhill, metaphorically. I suddenly heard a clunk, followed by the boat taking on a huge amount of water within a very short amount of time, let's say 2 seconds. It doesn't take a genius to figure out what had happened. The boat had literally split in half on the water, and we were now sinking fast. Get out, it's going down, I shouted, a little bit more explicitly than that. The whole kerfuffle must have lasted a maximum of 20 seconds, but it felt like forever. As me and 4 of the crew bailed, now treading water, we watched as the boat disappeared under the surface of the Dorney Lake. I hadn't noticed when it happened, but apparently the other half of our crew of 8 had actually managed to continue going with half a boat for a short amount of time before colliding into the bank. We were definitely a sorry sight as we trudged our way back to our bus, completely drenched in lake water. Overall, this disaster completely stemmed from my actions, and nobody knew. In fact, nobody knows to this day.
Oh.
When our poor boat was recovered, it was concluded that all the bolts holding it together had, for some unknown reason, simply snapped due to strain, and that the majority of them had fallen out during the accident. There were even allegations made against other teams of tampering from some boys in my crew, but there was no proof, needless to say. Yet again, I told nobody. So therefore, clearly, I need forgiveness from my crew, whose dreams of rowing success were eliminated by my doings. From Mr. G, who legend says has since quit rowing, to which I feel I might have played a part. From my school, who had to pay full price for a replacement boat, which I think we established was 20 grand. And from the staff at Eton Dorney, who had to go through the effort of retrieving the wreck from the bottom of the lake. However, I do not seek forgiveness whatsoever from the person who stole my bloomin' bolts, for they deserve at least part of the blame, which is fair enough. However, disastrous consequences for a boat that actually split in half due to the lack of 10 bolts. Let's see what Joe makes of this one.
I think that's fantastic. Although shifting the blame at the end, very, very dodgy. I also quite like the mention of Mr. G. I don't know if anybody else is a fan of Summer Heights High, Chris Lilly's comedy, but Mr. G is just the best character. However, with this particular Confessions, sometimes a lie is so big, it's so ginormous that you can't possibly own up to it. When there are so many things surrounding it, it would just be impossible to utter those words.
Yeah.
It was me what sunk the £20,000 boat. So I'm going to be a real softie and I'm going to forgive because I understand.
Because it's one thing to own up for something, I broke a jam jar, but, sinking a 20 grand boat, Bobby Pryor.
Noah, you're called Noah. By your name, you're meant to be good at boats and all things boat, just by your namesake. Noah, you sunk the boat, which is quite the opposite of what you should have done. I could have forgiven you if you genuinely forgot. It was just something you forgot to do. It was so awful. But you knew when the boat went in that it wasn't going to, well, you hoped it would hold together. But you knew. What I think, though, is I think you were sabotaged. I think someone stole those boats. The nuts and bolts got shifted. Having said that, it's one of those things of consequences. And what you should have done is said, I'm sorry, we are not together. We cannot compete. Because the consequences could have been awful. I mean, luckily, everything was all right. There was just a boat. It could have been worse. So